She said it out loud, in a hallway full of people, about the most dangerous man in Korea. She called him arrogant. She called him reckless. And then, almost to herself, like a confession she hadn't meant to make, she said he was devastatingly handsome, and that was probably the most infuriating thing about him. The hallway went completely silent, not the polite silence of people pretending not to listen. The other kind. The kind where lungs stop working and feet stop moving, and every single person in that corridor suddenly finds a reason to study the floor. Nyla Brooks realized it half a second too late. He had been standing behind her the entire time. If you're already hooked, drop a like and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning had started the way most of Nyla's mornings started, badly, and before 6 a.m. Her alarm went off at 5:45, and she silenced it with the flat of her palm before it could wake her roommate through the thin apartment wall they shared on the east side of Seoul. She lay there for exactly 4 seconds, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that she'd been meaning to report to the building manager for 3 months, and then she got up. There was no slow easing into consciousness, no scrolling through her phone, no sitting on the edge of the bed, stretching. She got up because there was no version of this morning where staying in bed was an option. She had 47 garment bags to prep, a seating chart for a shoot that the creative director had rearranged twice overnight, and a coffee order for 12 people that she'd memorized because writing it down somewhere accessible was apparently too straightforward a solution for anyone on the KMJ Media Productions team to accept. She was in the shower at 5:47, out by 5:58, and dressed in the dark because the overhead light in her room had burned out 6 days ago, and she hadn't had time to replace the bulb. That was the shape of Nyla Brooks' life. Not tragic, not dramatic, just consistently, grindingly inconvenient in ways that she handled quietly and alone, because that was what she did. That was what she had always done. She was 29 years old, a wardrobe coordinator for the fashion and media division of Kong Industries, which was the legitimate face of something considerably less legitimate that nobody in the company openly discussed, but everyone quietly understood. She had been in Seoul for 3 years. Before that, Atlanta. Before Atlanta, a childhood in a small city in North Carolina that she had left the moment leaving became an option, and she didn't talk about that either. She was good at her job. Genuinely, technically good. The kind of good that people noticed without acknowledging, where things just ran smoothly when she was in the room and fell apart the moment she stepped out. She knew fabric, she knew lighting and how it interacted with color. She knew which senior directors had fragile egos about certain aesthetic choices, and how to navigate those fragile egos without losing her own professional standards entirely. She knew how to carry 3 garment bags and 2 coffee trays simultaneously without spilling anything, which sounds like a low bar until you try it in 4-inch kitten heels on a polished marble floor. What she was less good at was keeping her mouth shut when she was tired. That was the thing. That was always the thing. The Kong Industries flagship studio was a 40-minute subway ride from her apartment, and she arrived at 6:42, which was 8 minutes earlier than she was required to be there, and still somehow not early enough because the freight elevator was occupied by a lighting crew, and she had to carry everything up 3 flights of stairs. By the time she reached the wardrobe suite on the 4th floor, her shoulders were aching, and she had already answered 7 messages from the creative director's assistant, whose name was Cho Hyun-suk, and who communicated exclusively in the language of barely contained panic. "The rack for the evening looks is wrong," Hyun-suk said, materializing beside her before she'd finished setting down the garment bags. He was 24 years old and permanently stressed in the specific way of people who have decided that their self-worth is directly proportional to their proximity to perceived importance. Director Yoon said the sequencing doesn't match the shot list. "The shot list was updated at 2 in the morning, Nyla said, without turning around. She was already unzipping the first bag. "I sequenced based on the current version. If Director Yoon changed it again after 2, I'll need to see the new version." "He changed it again after 2. "Then send it to me. He wants it fixed before the talent arrives." "Hyun-suk." She turned around. "Talent arrives at 9. It is 6:50. Send me the shot list and I will fix it. That is how this works." He sent her the shot list. She fixed it. By 8:15, the wardrobe suite was exactly as it needed to be. The coffee order was distributed, and Nyla had eaten approximately half of a granola bar standing over a trash can because there wasn't time to sit down. The first talent arrived at 8:50, a junior model named Soo Ah, who was 19 and nervous, and kept apologizing for things that weren't her fault, which Nyla recognized as a specific kind of learned behavior and felt the particular quiet ache of recognizing it. "You're fine," Nyla told her, more gently than her usual tone. "Stand here. Let me check the neckline. Stop apologizing. Sorry. That one doesn't count." Sua almost smiled. Almost. The shoot was for a new luxury fragrance line, Kong Industries' expansion into the beauty sector, which had been generating internal excitement for 6 months and external speculation for longer. The creative concept was atmospheric soul nightscapes, all deep blues and silver light, the kind of aspirational aesthetic that cost extraordinary amounts of money to make look effortless. There were 12 models, a photographer flown in from Paris whose name Nyla couldn't pronounce on the first try, 2 creative directors who disagreed with each other about nearly everything, and a studio floor that had been converted into something resembling a high-end film set. It should have been a clean operation. It was not a clean operation. By 11 in the morning, 2 of the looks had been rejected by the Paris photographer because they didn't align with his vision. One model had a wardrobe malfunction that Nyla repaired with a safety pin and genuine expertise, and director Yoon had changed the shot list again. Nyla moved through all of it the way she moved through everything, quietly, efficiently, without visible complaint, because visible complaint was a luxury she had calculated she couldn't afford. She was in the back corridor behind the studio floor at 11:37, navigating 3 heavy garment bags in one arm and a tray of coffee in the other, when she made the mistake. The mistake was this. She was tired, and her coworker Ji Young was walking beside her, and Ji Young had just made a casual observation about the company owner, about Kong Min Jae, whose name was spoken in this building with a particular quality of reverence that Nyla had always found slightly suffocating. And instead of saying nothing, instead of offering the neutral sound she usually offered when these conversations arose, Nyla opened her mouth. "He's got everyone in this company walking on eggshells," Nyla said. Her voice was flat, factual, the way she said most things. "Every time someone mentions his name, the whole room changes temperature. I've been here 3 years, and I've seen that man maybe 4 times. And every single one of those times, the people around him looked like they were trying to remember how to breathe normally. That's not leadership. That's just intimidation dressed up in expensive suits." Jai Young made a sound that wasn't quite agreement. Nyla adjusted the garment bags. "And he makes every major creative decision from a distance. Do you know what the lighting budget for this shoot is? Do you actually know? Because I looked at the approved expenditure report, and it is more than most people make in 2 years, and half of it is on equipment that the photographer didn't even request. It was on the approved list because apparently Kong Min Jae decided the existing equipment wasn't sufficient." Based on what? Based on his assessment, from wherever he sits issuing decisions down through 6 layers of management to people who are too afraid to push back.
Nyla.
"I'm not saying he isn't. I mean, look." She shifted her grip on the coffee tray. "The man is clearly not stupid. Everything he touches makes money. And yes, he is. I mean, objectively, the photographs of him are." She made a sound that was somewhere between dismissive and honest. "Devastating. Fine, objectively. But devastating and dangerous are not mutually exclusive qualities, and I have worked in enough environments surrounded by powerful men who mistake fear for respect to know the difference. He is arrogant. He is probably ruthless. And the fact that he's beautiful about it doesn't make him less dangerous. It makes him more." She stopped talking. Ji Young had stopped walking. The corridor had gone very, very quiet. Nyla became aware of several things simultaneously. The particular quality of the silence, the way Ji Young's face had changed, the fact that the footsteps she had assumed were her own echo were slightly offset, and a warmth at her back that didn't come from the overhead lighting. She turned around. He was standing approximately 4 feet behind her. Kong Min Jae was 36 years old, and he looked exactly like the photographs. Except that photographs apparently weren't capable of capturing the specific weight of his presence, which Nyla would describe later in the private architecture of her own thoughts as something atmospheric, like barometric pressure dropping before a storm. He was wearing a charcoal suit without a tie, which somehow looked more formal than if he'd been wearing one. He was not particularly tall for a man who occupied as much space as he did. He had the kind of face that belonged in the campaign imagery on the studio floor, all strong angles and a quality of stillness that could read as calm or dangerous depending on how you looked at it. I was looking at her with dark, unreadable eyes and the very slight expression of a man who has just heard something unexpected. Not angry, interested, which was Nyla would later understand, considerably more alarming. She did not drop the garment bags. She did not drop the coffee. She would think about this later with a certain grim satisfaction, that her hands stayed steady, that nothing spilled, that the first thing she said to the most powerful and most feared man in the building was not a strangled apology, but instead a very flat, very direct acknowledgement. You were behind me the entire time. Yes, said Kang Minjai. His voice was lower than she expected, unhurried. He spoke English without accent, which she hadn't known, and which landed as one more piece of unexpected information in a moment that was already too full of them. The corridor stretched emptily in both directions. Ji Young had, in the way of highly sensible people who recognize a situation and remove themselves from it, disappeared. The distant sounds of the studio floor, the photographer calling adjustments, the lighting crew rearranging, the ambient noise of 40 people doing their jobs, felt very far away. Nyla's options were limited, and she assessed them quickly. Apologizing extensively would be both dishonest and strategically weak. Pretending she hadn't said what she'd said was not available to her as an option. Fleeing was technically possible, but professionally catastrophic. She said, "How long?" "Long enough." "The part about arrogance?" "Yes." "The part about being dangerous?" "Yes." She watched his face. "The other part." Something in his expression shifted, almost imperceptible. "Yes." Nyla breathed in once, slowly, through her nose. "Then I suppose that's a complete picture." Minjay tilted his head slightly, the way someone does when they encounter a response they hadn't anticipated. He looked at the garment bags, then at the coffee tray, then back at her face, and something in his expression wasn't anger or amusement, but something in between them that she didn't have a clean word for. "You're the American," he said. It wasn't a question. "Nyla Brooks, wardrobe coordinator, fashion division, 3rd year." She had the dazed thought that she was basically giving him a resume in a hallway after insulting him to his face. "I should continue," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "What you were saying. Continue." She stared at him. "You want me to continue criticizing you to your face?" "You were already doing it to my back." He paused. "This is more honest." There were several things Nyla could have said. She didn't say most of them. What she said was, "I was telling the truth, not performing. I don't adjust what I actually think based on who I think is listening. That is apparently a flaw I have." "Most people in this building don't think at all," he said. "They repeat what they've decided I want to hear." He looked at her for a moment longer than was entirely comfortable. "You are not most people in this building." "No," she said, "I'm not." He reached out. She didn't step back, though every instinct she had fired simultaneously, and took one of the garment bags from her arm. The weight redistributed. She felt the relief in her shoulder before she could stop herself from feeling it. He handed the bag to the man she now realized was standing 10 feet behind him, who she also hadn't noticed, who had the quiet and specific quality of someone whose job involved not being noticed. "The coffee," Minjay said, "is getting cold." "I know," Nyla said. "Go deliver it." She looked at him. "Are you dismissing you?" "No." He put his hands in his pockets. The quality of his stillness was remarkable. "Continuing a conversation in a corridor with garment bags and cold coffee seems inefficient. Finish your work. We'll speak again." It was phrased like a statement and felt like a decision that had already been made without her input, which was precisely the kind of thing she had been criticizing 4 minutes ago in this same hallway. She was aware of the irony. She was also, frustratingly, aware that her pulse had not returned to its normal rhythm. "Will we?" she said. "Yes," said Kang Min-jae, with the calm certainty of a man who was not accustomed to the word no and had not yet decided whether she would be the one to introduce it to him. He walked away. His security person followed. The corridor absorbed them both. Nyla stood still for 3 seconds. Then she turned around and delivered the coffee. The studio floor received her with the comfortable noise of organized chaos, and she slid back into it the way she always slid into work, by becoming useful, by finding the next thing that needed doing, by putting her hands to something concrete. The Paris photographer wanted the third look adjusted. She adjusted it. Sua needed reassurance before her close-up sequence. She provided it, briefly, practically, in the way that actually helped, rather than the way that felt good to perform. 2 garment bags needed to be re-steamed. She re-steamed them. She did not mention the conversation in the corridor to anyone. Ji Young reappeared at some point around noon and looked at Nyla with an expression that contained a full question and several follow-up questions and the specific quality of someone who had very strongly decided not to ask them. Nyla offered nothing. Ji Young eventually got distracted by a lighting adjustment crisis, and the moment passed. Lunch was a 15-minute window at 12:45. Nyla stood near the craft services table and ate a container of cold rice from the morning because that was what was available, and she needed fuel more than she needed anything pleasant. Around her, people ate and laughed and complained about the Paris photographer's communication style, and she cataloged these things the way she always cataloged the people she worked with, efficiently, without much attachment, noting who was struggling and who was performing struggling and who was genuinely carrying more than they should be and saying nothing about it. Sua was sitting alone near the equipment cases, eating half a rice cake with the mechanical joylessness of someone who had been taught to perform not hungry. Nyla watched this for approximately 30 seconds before she picked up a container of food from the table, walked over, and put it down next to the girl without comment. Sua looked up. "You need to eat actual food," Nyla said. "You're going to be on your feet for 4 more hours under hot lights." "I'm fine. You're 19 and you've been under lights since 9 and you had half a rice cake." Nyla sat down on the equipment case 2 feet away because she had 12 minutes left of lunch and she needed to eat too, and the principle she was operating on was that nobody should eat alone in a room full of people if someone else can choose differently. Eat. Sua ate. They didn't talk much. Nyla asked her where she was from, and Sua said Busan, and Nyla said she'd been there once, and the raw fish had genuinely changed her life. And Sua almost laughed again. A real one, this time, quick and surprised, like laughter that hadn't had many opportunities to come out, and wasn't sure if this one was safe. 12 minutes ended. Nyla stood up. "You did well this morning. The close-up sequence, you were present. That's harder than it looks." Sua said nothing for a moment. Then, "Nobody usually says things like that." "I know," Nyla said, and went back to work. The afternoon shoot ran long, as shoots always did, and by 4:15 the Paris photographer was unhappy with the blue tones in the primary look, and the creative directors were having a disagreement that had migrated from professional to personal somewhere around the 3rd hour. And Nyla was repinning a hem on a moving model, while simultaneously tracking 3 simultaneous requests through her earpiece and maintaining a mental inventory of which pieces needed immediate re-steaming for tomorrow's continuation session. She did not think about the corridor. She told herself this several times throughout the afternoon. Each time she found her attention skipping back to the image of Min Jae standing behind her in the hallway with that particular unreadable expression. Not what he'd said, which was strange enough, but the feeling of it, the specific quality of being looked at by someone who was actually looking rather than cataloging or assessing or performing interest. She was not accustomed to being looked at like that. She had, over the years and through one significant and painful relationship, become more accustomed to being managed. She put it away. She had work to do. The shoot wrapped at 5:50, which was 50 minutes past schedule, and the breakdown took another hour. And by the time Nyla had logged the inventory and coordinated with the overnight storage team and answered the last 11 messages from Hyun Suk, it was 7:23 in the evening. Her feet ached from the kitten heels. Her shoulders ached from the garment bags. She was hungry in the hollow, absent way of someone who has been too busy to register hunger for most of the day and is only now noticing the accumulated deficit. She was in the elevator with Ji Young and a lighting technician when Ji Young finally cracked. "We don't have to talk about it," Ji Young said. "But I need you to know that I have been holding that in for 8 hours and my internal pressure gauge is in the red." "You're fine," Nyla said. "He took the garment bag." "I know. He personally took the garment bag from your arm." Ji Young, and then he walked away like it was a completely normal thing to do. "It's not complicated." Nyla stared at the elevator doors. "He overheard something. He was curious. He said we'd talk again." That is the entirety of what happened, and I am treating it as a workplace incident and moving on. Ji Young looked at her with an expression that communicated significant skepticism about this framing, but chose not to voice it, because the lighting technician was still present, and some conversations have an appropriate venue, and a service elevator is not it. The lobby of Kong Industries' flagship building was marble and glass, and the particular careful quiet of money. At 7:28 in the evening, it was mostly empty. The administrative staff gone, security at their stations, The ambient lighting shifted to its evening mode. Nyla signed out at the security desk with her ID and her bag and headed for the main doors. She almost made it. "Ms. Brooks." The voice came from behind her and to the left, and she knew it before she turned, which was irritating information to have. Minju was standing near the building's interior garden, a small enclosed space with clean gravel lines and angular plants that existed purely as aesthetic, with the same quality of stillness he'd had in the corridor. He was no longer in the jacket. His sleeves were rolled to the forearm, which was a detail that read differently against the context of everything she knew about who he was. And she filed that observation away with the uncomfortable awareness that she was making it. The security person from earlier was 10 feet back. Not invisible this time, just present, the way furniture is present. "You've been here since 6:40, Minjae said. Nyla stopped. "Monitoring the sign-in logs it's what I do," he said, without apology. "This is my building." She couldn't argue with the logic, which was itself an annoying quality. "I was doing my job. The shoot ran long. You didn't eat lunch." It was stated, not questioned. She stared at him. "I ate during the lunch window. I watched the floor footage between noon and 1. He paused at her expression. "Security review, standard protocol." I watch the floors when I'm in the building. It is not surveillance of individuals." He studied her. "You put food on the table next to the junior model. You didn't eat." "I ate." "After you gave her something, not before." The precision of this bothered her in a way she couldn't immediately name. "I ate rice from this morning. It was enough." "You were under lights and on your feet from approximately 7 until nearly 8, with a 15-minute break, and you gave away a portion of food." He said it with the flat quality of someone who is not issuing a judgment, but recording a fact, which somehow made it worse. "That is not a sustainable operating pace." "With respect," Nyla said. "You have a company to run. I'll manage my own operating pace." "You will," he agreed, "but you don't have to be careless about it." There was a silence. Not hostile. Something else. "You said we'd speak again," Nyla said. "Is this that?" "Yes." "What do you want?" The question came out more direct than she'd intended, but she didn't walk it back. She watched his expression. "To have dinner," he said. "With you. Tomorrow evening." She looked at him for a long moment. "That is either a request or an instruction. I'm not sure which." "A request," he said. Genuinely. "Why?" He considered the question with a seriousness that she hadn't expected, like it deserved a real answer, and he was going to give it one. "Because everyone in this building tells me what they've calculated I want to hear. And you stood in a hallway today and told me what you actually thought without knowing I was there, which means it was true." He held her gaze. "I don't encounter that. I was talking about you, to your back, while carrying garment bags." "Yes. And your response to that is churros, dinner?" "Yes." She was quiet for 3 seconds. "I'll think about it." He nodded once, not surprised, not wounded, simply accepting of the terms, which was itself unexpected. "I'll have my assistant send you the details," he said. "If you decide yes." He walked past her. His security person followed. The lobby absorbed them. Nyla stood beside the interior garden for a moment, looking at the clean gravel lines and the angular plants. She was tired and hungry, and her feet hurt, and she was standing in the lobby of a building owned by a man she had just described as arrogant and dangerous to his face, his back, technically, and who had responded to this by asking her to dinner. She had 347 new messages in the work channel. She had cold rice waiting in her refrigerator. She had a bulb to replace in her bedroom ceiling. She did not know what she was going to say. She walked out of the building into the Seoul evening, where the air was cool and the city was doing what it always did, running, moving, consuming itself. And she got on the subway, and she looked out the black glass of the window at the nothing moving past, and she thought about the specific quality of being looked at by someone who was actually looking. She thought about how dangerous that was. She thought about how she'd recognized it anyway. She was home by 8:47. She changed the light bulb first, before eating, because it felt like the kind of small competence she needed to have right now. The warm light came on. The room looked like her room. She ate cold rice standing at her kitchen counter, and she did not answer the message from the contact labeled KMJ Admin, Private, that arrived in her personal inbox at 9:03, politely and formally confirming the dinner reservation at Kong Min Jae's private dining suite for the following evening and noting that a car would be available at her convenience. She did not answer it. She went to sleep. She did not sleep well. In the morning, she answered it. She said yes. She told herself it was because she was a professional. And this was technically a professional development opportunity, and the most powerful man in the company had issued a direct invitation, and declining it entirely carried its own set of workplace consequences. She told herself that. What she couldn't tell herself, what sat underneath everything with the particular stubbornness of things that are true even when they're inconvenient, was the image of him standing in the lobby with his sleeves rolled up, saying, "You don't have to be careless about it," in the voice of someone who had been watching more carefully than she knew. That was the thing she hadn't expected, that he'd noticed. By the time she arrived at the studio on day 2 of the shoot, and Hyun Suk met her at the freight elevator with 12 new problems and a reshuffled shot list, word had already begun to move through the building in the way that it always moved through buildings like this one. Not in straight lines, but in whispers and glances, and the particular silence that falls over a conversation when the wrong person enters the room. Someone had seen them talking in the lobby. Someone had seen him take the garment bag. And by 10:15 in the morning, Ji-young was looking at her with an expression that had moved well past the red zone of her internal pressure gauge. And across the floor, the Paris photographer's assistant was on the phone with someone and not making eye contact with Nyla in the specific way of someone who has just relayed a piece of information and feels slightly bad about it. Nyla steamed a jacket and said nothing. She had one dinner. It meant nothing yet. But something had already shifted. In the building, in the quality of space around her, in the way certain eyes tracked her movements and certain voices went quieter when she walked past. And she was old enough and experienced enough and had been through enough to recognize the sensation for what it was. It was the beginning of something. And beginnings, in her experience, were never as safe as they looked. She was pinning the collar on the 6th look of the morning when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked it quickly, expecting Hyun Suk, expecting another shot list revision, expecting any of the 100 operational fires she spent her days extinguishing. It was not Hyun Suk. It was an unfamiliar number, not KMJ admin, not the assistant, but a direct number, and the message was 4 words. Tonight. 7. Don't cancel. She stood in the middle of the studio floor with 47 garment bags and 12 models and 2 arguing creative directors and a Paris photographer who wanted everything different. And she read those 4 words and felt the particular sensation of something closing around her that was not quite a trap, and not quite a choice, and not quite anything she had a clean word for. She put the phone back in her pocket. She finished the collar pin. She did not reply. But she also, without fully deciding to, began calculating whether the black dress or the burgundy one was appropriate for a private dining suite in a building owned by a man who frightened the entire city of Seoul, and whether appropriate was even the right metric, and what it meant that she was calculating it at all. That question would still be unanswered 5 hours later, when Nyla arrived at the private dining floor, and a suited attendant opened a door and inside, past a table set with more quiet elegance than she had encountered in 3 years in this city, Kang Min-jae stood with his back to the city lights burning across Seoul below, and turned when she entered, and said her name. Not Ms. Brooks. Her name. And everything about the shape of the evening changed. The attendant closed the door behind her with the precise, soundless efficiency of someone who had been trained to disappear, and the room settled into a quiet that felt nothing like the quiet of the corridor yesterday or the lobby last night. This was different. This was the quiet of intention, of a space that had been arranged for a specific purpose and was now waiting to see whether that purpose would be fulfilled. Kang Min-jae stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows on the far end of the room, the city spreading behind him in every direction, Seoul's grid of light going on further than the eye wanted to track. He had changed. A darker suit, still no tie, the collar open one button at the throat. He looked like a man who had thought about how casual to appear and then decided the calculation itself was beneath him. He said her name. Not Ms. Brooks. Not the wardrobe coordinator. Not the American. Nyla. She stopped inside the door. The dress she'd chosen was the burgundy, not because it was appropriate, which it wasn't in any conventional professional sense, but because it was hers, because she'd bought it in a second-hand shop in Itaewon on a Tuesday when she'd had $60 to spare and felt like she deserved something that fit, and when she wore it she felt like herself rather than a function. She had decided, standing in front of her closet at 6:15, that if she was going to walk into something she didn't fully understand, she was going to do it as herself. "You already know my name," she said. "I've known it for 3 years." He moved toward the table, gestured to the chair on the near side with the particular unhurried quality of someone who has never had to rush anything. "Sit, please." She sat. The table was set with the kind of quiet elegance that doesn't announce itself. Dark plates, a low arrangement of branches, and small white flowers in the center. No candles, because the city through the glass provided its own ambient light. There was already water poured, 2 glasses of something darker beside them. "I don't drink," she said. "As a baseline, I'm not refusing specifically." "I know," he said. He sat across from her. "There's water and there's a pressed grape juice that isn't wine. The staff made an assumption. I had them put both out." She looked at the darker glass. It was, in fact, a deep red that was too vivid and too still to be wine. She felt the small, specific discomfort of being someone who had been paid attention to. Not the uncomfortable attention of being watched, but the uncomfortable attention of being known, which was a different kind of exposure entirely. "You pulled my file," she said. "I know everyone in this building." That's not an answer. He poured water for himself. "I read your file this morning, after the lobby, yes." "And?" "And you're underpaid," he said, with the direct flatness of someone reporting a factual finding. "By approximately 30% relative to your counterpart in the Tokyo division, who has less experience and a narrower skill scope." She looked at him across the table. "Is that why you asked me here? To discuss my compensation?" "No." He set the water down. "I asked you here because of the corridor, because of what you said and because of how you said it, and because in this building, which I have run for 11 years, nobody speaks to me the way you spoke about me." He held her gaze. "And I was curious whether it was performance." "Performance. Some people perform directness. They calculate that candor will impress powerful people and they practice it. It is still ultimately strategic. A version of flattery with the flattery inverted." He studied her. "That's not what you were doing." "No." "You didn't know I was there." "I told you, I don't adjust what I think based on audience." "Why not?" The question landed plainly, and she took a moment with it, which she appreciated about herself, that she didn't immediately reach for an easy answer. "Because I spent long enough in a situation where I adjusted everything I said and thought and wore and ate based on what someone else wanted to receive, and at the end of that I looked at myself and I didn't recognize the person I'd become." She reached for the water. "That was a long time ago. I decided I wouldn't do it again." Minju was quiet for a moment. "Someone specific." "That's not your business yet." The yet arrived in the air between them and sat there, and she watched him notice it. His expression didn't change, but something in it did. A small adjustment, the way a careful person adjusts their weight when the ground shifts slightly underfoot. "Fair," he said. The food arrived in the unhurried cadence of a kitchen that understood pacing. Something light first, something warm and savory second, each course given enough space to be itself. Nyla ate without performing disinterest because she was hungry and the food was extraordinary, and pretending otherwise seemed both dishonest and wasteful. Minjai ate across from her and they talked, not about work, not about power or company structure or the dynamics of the building below them. They talked about soul in winter versus soul in summer, and whether the city ever genuinely slept or just changed registers. They talked about North Carolina in a way that surprised her. He had been there once, briefly, for a business meeting in Charlotte, and he had found it humid and unexpectedly green, and she said, "Yes, it is." And for a moment it felt like a perfectly ordinary conversation between two people sharing a meal rather than whatever this actually was. "You said I was lonely," Minjae said, quietly. Not as an accusation, as a reference point. She set down her fork. "I said you were dangerous." "Before that, in the corridor." He looked at his plate briefly. "You said the people around me looked like they were trying to remember how to breathe. That's a specific observation. It implies something about what you think my daily environment feels like." She was quiet. "You were right," he said. "I am not making a bid for sympathy. I am saying you were accurate." "I know I was accurate." She looked at him. "I've been around men like you before. Different kind of power, different city, same shape of loneliness. It's very recognizable from the outside." "What shape is it?" She thought about it honestly. You're surrounded by people who need something from you, all the time, every room you walk into. And they perform loyalty because they need you functional and accessible. And they perform admiration because that's what they think you want to hear. And after long enough, you can't actually distinguish between someone who is genuinely in your corner and someone who has just memorized the script. She looked at him. So you stop looking. You stop expecting it, and you get very good at being alone in rooms full of people. He didn't answer immediately. Yes, he said. It doesn't make you less dangerous, she said. Just so we're clear. Lonely, powerful men are arguably more dangerous than comfortable ones. The combination of those things is not softening information. He almost smiled. It didn't reach his eyes, but it reached the corner of his mouth, and it looked genuine, which was different from every other expression she'd seen from him tonight. You won't let me have anything. I'm not here to give you things. Then why are you here? She picked up her fork again. I'm still figuring that out. The evening ended at 10:15. Not with drama. Not with anything overt. He walked her to the elevator himself. The security person present, but further back. A concession to something. She wasn't sure what. And when the elevator arrived, he held the door while she stepped in, and he said goodnight. The way someone says goodnight, who means something slightly more than the word, but isn't going to say the additional thing tonight. Same time next week, he said. Not a question. I'll think about it, she said. The same answer she'd given him the first time. He let the door close. She rode down alone and walked out into Seoul and got into the car that was waiting. She had not requested a car. There was simply a car. And sat in the back while the city moved past the windows and tried to work out what precisely she was afraid of and whether she was afraid of him or afraid of herself, which were two different problems with very different solutions. She was afraid of herself. She knew it by the time she got home. She went to the next dinner. And the one after that. 3 weeks moved in the way that weeks move when they contain something that is growing, incrementally during the day, suddenly at night, with a quality of accumulation that only becomes visible when you look back. The building noticed. The building always noticed. She had not gone looking for the thing that was growing between herself and Min-jae, had not cultivated it or encouraged it beyond showing up and being honest. But honest was apparently the rarest currency in his world. And he spent his attention on it the way people spend attention on rare things, completely, and with an awareness of value. Things began to change in small ways that she only mapped in retrospect. The broken freight elevator that the maintenance team had been delaying for 2 months was repaired on a Thursday morning without announcement. The issue of the Tokyo wage disparity that she had mentioned at their second dinner, offhandedly, in the context of workplace fairness, not as a request, resulted in an adjusted pay structure for the fashion division that arrived as a policy document without attribution. When the overnight security system flagged an entry card issue that had been causing access problems for 3 junior coordinators, it was resolved the following morning before anyone had formally submitted a report. She connected the dots. She didn't know how to feel about the dots being connectable. Ji-young, who had observed all of this with the focused attention of a scientist watching a chemical reaction, finally said, He's solving problems you mentioned, isn't he? He's solving operational inefficiencies, Nyla said, that you mentioned to him. I mentioned general things. You mentioned the elevator in week 2. Ji-young looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has decided to say the thing. Nyla, I'm your friend. What is happening? Nyla finished logging the inventory sheet. I don't know yet. Is it good or bad? She was quiet for a moment. I don't know that either. What she knew was this, that Minji listened to her the way people listen when they are not waiting for their turn to speak. That in 3 weeks of dinners, he had not once pushed at her edges or asked for anything she wasn't offering. That he was still frightening, still the man whose name changed the temperature of rooms, still the man whose company operated in the visible, legitimate world and the invisible other world simultaneously, and that none of that had diminished. She had not confused his patience for softness. She was not confused about what he was. But she was, slowly and against her better judgment, becoming confused about whether she was doing the intelligent thing by continuing to show up, or whether she was doing the true thing, and whether those were the same. That was the state of things when the photograph appeared. It was a Tuesday. She found out about it the way you find out about things in the digital era. Not gradually, not with warning, but all at once. The way a tide comes in when you're not watching the water. Ji-young sent her a link at 8:46 in the morning with a message that was simply, don't panic. She panicked slightly. The The photograph was paparazzi, long lens, low quality, taken from the street level below as she walked out of the Kang Industries building on a Thursday evening 3 weeks ago. She was recognizable. The car waiting at the curb was recognizable to anyone who paid attention to that kind of thing. The headline on the blog that had published it was in Korean, but the translation app on her phone rendered it without mercy. Kang Min-jae's new company, American wardrobe coordinator? The comment section was already 200 responses long. She scrolled 3 lines. Stopped. Put the phone face down on the wardrobe suite table. She had 37 garment bags to prep. She prepped them. By noon, the photograph had been picked up by 2 larger entertainment blogs. By 2 in the afternoon, her name was in the headline. By 4, someone had found her social media profile, not a company account, her personal one, which was private but apparently not private enough, and screenshotted 3 years of photographs and posted them with a caption that she did not read past the first sentence. She kept working. The shoot that day was a catalog job, lower stakes than the fragrance campaign, and she moved through it with the mechanical focus of someone who has decided that the only thing she can control right now is whether the job gets done. Sua, who had become a quiet regular in Nyla's professional orbit, found her during a lighting reset and said nothing, just stood nearby with the specific kind of company that doesn't require conversation, which Nyla appreciated more than she would have been able to articulate. At 5:40, Min-jae texted her. Not through the admin, directly. I'm aware. Are you okay? She stared at the message for a moment. Working, she typed back. Fine. 3 minutes passed. You're not fine, I'll see you tonight. She started to type. I don't think tonight is a good... She stopped. She deleted it. She typed 7. She sent it. The private dining floor was different that evening, quieter, if that was possible, and she recognized the difference as the quality of something braced. Min-jae was already there when she arrived, standing near the windows again but facing her this time, already turned, as if he'd heard her coming. He was on the phone. He finished the call with 3 words in Korean that she didn't catch, put the phone in his jacket pocket, and looked at her. She looked back. How bad is it? She said. Manageable. He said it with the precision of someone calibrating the word carefully. Currently. There are people who will run with it. There are people who already are. He gestured toward the table. Sit. I don't want to sit. He accepted this. Then stand. He moved away from the window and stood near the center of the room, 6 feet from her. The photograph is low quality and taken in a public location. It shows you leaving the building. It does not show you with me. It shows me getting into your car. A car. My name is not on the car. People know the car. Yes. He didn't pretend otherwise. People in a specific circle know the car. That circle is currently making inferences and posting them publicly. She felt the specific tightness in her chest that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite anger, but lived between them. I have a private social media account. Someone went into it. Someone screenshotted everything. Something moved in his expression. I know. Who? I'm looking into it. His voice was flat in the way it got when something had his attention completely, and not in a comfortable sense. It takes time to trace digital activity correctly. I will know by tomorrow. She stared at him. You're already running a trace. Yes. Because of a tabloid photograph. Because someone accessed a private account without authorization and is using the contents to target you. His voice did not rise. It never rose. But it had the quality of something that was controlled specifically because it needed to be. That is not a tabloid matter. She felt the ground shift slightly under her feet. Not because of what he'd said, which was, objectively, the measured response of someone with resources responding to a genuine privacy violation, but because of how he'd said it. Not like a powerful man managing an inconvenience in his vicinity, like someone who was angry on her behalf. The specific, focused anger of someone who does not get angry often, and therefore means it completely when they do. She had not prepared for that. This is going to get worse, she said, before it gets better, if it gets better. Yes. People are already... The comments on that blog. She stopped, started again. I have been in Seoul for 3 years, and I built something here. Professional reputation, a small one, but mine. And now, it won't be lost. You don't know that. I know what I can protect. He said it simply. No performance of certainty, no borrowed confidence. And I know what this city does to women who become adjacent to me in the public eye, and I will not let that happen to you without what? Her voice came out sharper than she meant it. Without your intervention? Without Kang Min-jae deciding that I'm under his protection now, and everything that comes attached to that word. Do you understand what that means for me? Do you understand what it means to be a woman who looks like me, in this industry, in this city, and have it be publicly known that the most feared crime boss in Korea has decided she's his what? His project? His person? She stopped herself. Her breath was shorter than she wanted it to be. I'm not a problem you get to solve. The silence after that had weight. Min-jae looked at her with the expression of someone receiving something accurate and painful at the same time, and not flinching from it. No, he said. You're not. Then what am I? This question cost her something. She felt it leave her. He was quiet for 3 seconds. 4. The soul lights burned behind him. Someone I want to be honest with, he said, which is not the same as someone I want to manage. He held her gaze. I know the difference, and I know you know the difference. That is why you've been showing up for 3 weeks. She wanted to argue with that. She found she couldn't. The photograph, she said. The comments. The person who went into my private account. She looked at him. Is this because of you? Specifically because of you? He didn't hesitate. Possibly. So me being near you is a liability. For me. Yes. No softening, no qualification. If you walk away right now, the story fades in 2 weeks. Low evidence, no follow-through. You keep the professional life you've built. You keep the 3 years of work. You keep yourself out of this. He said it like a man reading a file. Accurately, without the cruelty of accuracy, and without the false mercy of omitting it. That is the option. She watched him. And if I don't walk away? He didn't answer immediately, and when he did, it was not what she expected. Then you are no longer out here alone, and neither am I. He said it quietly. That is also true. She stood in the middle of the room with the city light coming through the glass and the sound of her own pulse, which was louder than she liked. And she looked at the man across from her who was dangerous and lonely and ruthlessly honest, and had fixed a freight elevator and a wage disparity, and was currently running a digital trace on whoever had violated her privacy, and she thought about walking away. She thought about it for a long time. She was still thinking about it when her phone lit up on the table between them. She glanced at it. Unknown number. 6 words in the preview field. We need to talk. It's Preston. The air left the room. She felt it go. Not dramatically, not with visible collapse, but in the specific way warmth leaves a space when a door opens to something cold. Her hands, which had been steady all evening, all day, through every photograph and every comment and every moment of performing fine, stopped being steady. Min-jae saw it. She knew he saw it because she watched his eyes move from her face to the phone and back, and the quality of his stillness changed in the specific way of someone who has just read a room and recalibrated everything. Put it down, he said quietly. I haven't picked it up. Nyla. She picked it up. She did not call the number back. She read the preview text again. We need to talk. It's Preston. And then she set the phone face down on the table with the deliberate care of someone handling something that might detonate. And she stood very still and breathed through her nose once, slowly, and looked at the middle distance for approximately 4 seconds. Ex-boyfriend, she said. Her voice came out flat, controlled. The voice she used when control was the only thing available. From Atlanta. We ended 3.5 years ago. I moved to Seoul 3 years ago. Those 2 facts are related. Min-jae said nothing. He waited. I haven't spoken to him since I left. She looked up. I changed my number twice. This is my current number, my private number, the one attached to the private social media account that someone accessed last night. The connection between those facts assembled itself in the air between them with the cold mechanical clarity of something that had always been true and was only now visible. He found my number through my account. Or he had someone find it for him, Min-jae said. The word someone landed with its full weight. She sat down. Not because she was weak, because the alternative was standing in the middle of the room with her legs operating on reflex while her mind processed something that was reorganizing the last 12 hours into a different shape. The photograph, the blog posts, the screenshotted social media, the private account breach. And now Preston's number on her phone like a hand reaching through a door she had locked from the inside. Tell me about him, Minjae said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat, forearms on the table, not touching her, not performing comfort, just present and level and waiting. Everything relevant. Define relevant. Start with what he did. End with why you left. She looked at the phone lying face down on the table. He didn't hit me, she said, because that was always the first thing people needed cleared away. The visible baseline below, which everything else got minimized. He was meticulous about how I presented myself, what I wore, how I spoke in public, who I spent time with. He'd frame it as preference, as caring about me. It took me a long time to understand the difference between someone who has preferences about their partner and someone who is methodically reducing their partner's world down to a size they can manage. She paused. 2 years. It took me 2 years to understand that difference, and then it took me another 6 months to actually leave, because by then I had convinced myself on some level that I was the problem, that I was too sensitive, that I was misreading things, that he loved me, and love sometimes felt like this. Minjae was listening with his full attention. When I left, he was, she chose the word carefully, unhappy about it. Not violent, but there were messages, calls, things sent to people I worked with. A version of events about our relationship that made me sound unstable and difficult, distributed to people in my professional circle in Atlanta. She finally looked at him. He has money, not your kind of money, but enough to be persistent without consequence. And he is the kind of person who does not experience the end of something as a conclusion. He experiences it as a problem requiring a solution. And the solution, in his framework, Minjae said, is to reacquire the thing he lost. Yes. And what triggered contact now, after 3 years? She looked at him. He looked at her. The answer was obvious, and they both knew it was obvious. And she said it anyway because saying it out loud was the only way to make it real and manageable rather than letting it sit in the room as an implication. You, the photograph, seeing me publicly adjacent to you. She pressed her thumb against the edge of the phone without picking it up. Preston does not respond well to the idea that something he decided to discard has been valued by someone else, especially publicly, especially by someone, she gestured vaguely in his direction, like you, like me, he repeated. Powerful, visible, the kind of person whose public interest is a statement. She watched him. He will not interpret this as me moving on. He will interpret this as a challenge, a competitive loss, and he will respond to it the way he responds to everything, by trying to control the narrative before anyone else can. Minjae was quiet for a moment, that felt like the quiet of someone adding numbers and not liking the sum. Then he said, "He's the source." She went very still. What? The blog post. The photograph. Someone fed the initial tip to the entertainment outlet. He said it without inflection. The photograph was paparazzi. They don't need a tip to stake out my building. I'm a regular target. But the caption that appeared with the story and the specific framing of the social media material released alongside it, that required someone who knew who you were, someone who knew you were connected to me, someone who had a reason to make that connection as public and as damaging as possible. She heard her own breathing. My team found the account that first shared the screenshot material, he said. It's clean, created recently, nothing traceable on the surface. But the photograph selected and the framing used suggest personal knowledge. The choice of which images to highlight. There were 3 photographs in your private account from events in Atlanta. Whoever chose them knew what they were referencing. The room felt colder than it was. He's been watching my private account, she said. For how long? We're still mapping the access trail. Minjae's voice had taken on the flat, precise quality of a man who is furious and managing it with surgical containment. But the account was accessed multiple times over the past 6 weeks, before the photograph, before any of this. 6 weeks. She had been having dinners for 3 weeks. The access had started 3 weeks before that, which meant Preston had not found her through the photograph. He had been watching before the photograph. He had been watching, and then the photograph had arrived as confirmation, and he had used what he already had to. He's been monitoring me, she said, this whole time. Yes, she stood up. Not with direction, just up. Because sitting still with that information inside her was physically impossible. She moved to the window and stood with the soul light spread below her and her arms crossed over her chest, and she breathed, once, twice, through the controlled, slow deliberation of someone refusing to come apart in front of another person. "I left," she said, to the glass. "I left the country. I changed my number. I built 3 years of something new and kept myself small and quiet enough that there was nothing to find." Her voice was level, and she hated how level it was, because level meant the feeling was going somewhere internal, and interior damage was the kind she didn't recover from quickly. And he just waited until there was something to use. "You were never going to be small enough," Minjae said, behind her. "That's not how this kind of person operates. You were not hiding badly. You were trying to hide from someone who had decided you were a problem he owned." She turned around. I was standing now too, closer than before, and his face in the window light was different from the controlled social face, and different from the boardroom face, and different even from the dinner face. It was the face of someone who has stopped performing anything and is simply present, simply feeling whatever he is feeling without constructing an appropriate response. "I'm going to handle this," he said. "I know." She looked at him. "That's what I'm afraid of." Something flickered. "Why?" "Because when you handle things," she said slowly, "they get handled in ways that I am not permitted to know about and cannot ask about and will never have full information on, and I will be protected and simultaneously completely outside of my own situation." She heard the shape of what she was saying. "I don't want to be managed, not by him and not by you. I want to be in the room where the decisions about my life are made." He was quiet for a moment. "Then be in the room," he said. She blinked. "I'm not—" he started and stopped, and she watched him find the words with the precision of someone who doesn't use words carelessly. "I am not Preston. I do not need you smaller. I do not benefit from you disoriented or dependent or outside the decision-making. If anything," a brief pause, "your judgment is the only thing in this situation I trust, because it is not interested in protecting me." She looked at him for a long moment. Her phone lit up again on the table. Same unknown number. A text this time. "I know you're with him right now. We should talk before this gets worse for you." The cold that moved through her was not fear. It was the specific recognition of a predator's tactics, the performance of reasonableness, the implication of threat dressed as concern, the careful positioning of himself as the helpful option rather than the source of the danger. She had heard this voice before. Different words, same architecture. She picked up the phone. Minjae watched her. She typed back 3 words. "Don't contact me." Blocked the number. Set the phone down. "He'll find another number," she said. "Yes." "He'll escalate." "Yes." She looked at the window. At Seoul. At the city that had been hers for 3 years. Small and quiet and genuinely hers. And she understood with the clarity of someone who has been through enough to recognize a before and after moment that she was standing in one right now. That tomorrow would not look like yesterday. That whatever she had been building in this city in the shape of a private, manageable life was already changed, and the question was not whether the change could be avoided, but what shape she was going to take inside it. She did not cry. She had stopped being someone who cried about the wrong things long enough ago that the reflex barely registered. She felt the shape of the loss, the specific grief of something quiet being destroyed by someone else's noise, and she felt it clearly and completely, and then she set it down. "The media is going to get worse before your team can contain it," she said. "Yes. Preston is going to feed more material. He has 3 years of access to my private account. He has photographs, check-ins, anything I tagged or stored privately. We're working on getting the account secured and pulling the access trail backward. Anything he's already downloaded we can't recover, but we can document and respond." She nodded slowly. "My apartment address is private, but it's attached to my company employment file." "I know." His voice had taken on a careful quality. "Nyla, I want to move you, tonight." She looked at him. "Not as a decision I'm making for you," he said. "As a recommendation I'm making to you, with full information. Your address will be findable by tomorrow morning given the access he already has. And when the media escalates, which it will, your building will not be a safe space." He held her gaze. "I have a property outside the city, fully secured, staff. You would have your own space, complete privacy within the compound, and you would be unreachable by anyone I haven't personally cleared." She was quiet. "That sounds like moving in with you," she said. "It sounds like moving to a secure property temporarily, which is a different thing." "Is it?" He looked at her steadily. I have 17 rooms. You would not have to see me if you didn't want to. She breathed out slowly through her nose. And if I say no, then I will increase external security at your building, assign a private detail, and work the digital side as fast as possible. You can stay in your apartment. His jaw worked slightly. I will not pretend that option makes me comfortable. Why? Because if something happens to you in that apartment while I have a compound with armed perimeter security sitting empty 40 minutes away, I will not be able to live with that. She looked at him for a long time. You're not asking me this because I'm yours, she said. You're asking because you matter. He said it with the directness of someone who has decided that precision is more respectful than gentleness. You matter to me. That is a fact I am not managing or packaging. I am telling you because you asked me not to operate around you without information. The soul lights burned. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. I'll need to go home first, she said. Pack a bag, minimum. I'll tell Ji Young I'm staying with a friend. Something in his expression released, barely visible, but there. I'll have a car ready in 15 minutes. Minjai? She stopped near the door. He looked at her. I'm not moving in with you, she said clearly. I'm making a practical decision in a dangerous situation. Those are different things. I know, he said. And when this is over, you go back to your life, he said. As it should be, your choice. Always. She looked at him for one more moment. This man who was feared and lonely and ruthlessly honest and had just said you matter without flinching. And then she opened the door. The drive to her apartment took 22 minutes. She packed in 14. Efficient, practical, the bag of a person who has learned to move quickly when moving quickly becomes necessary. She was in the elevator heading back down when her phone buzzed. Not the blocked number. Her work phone. A notification from a news aggregator app she'd downloaded 3 years ago to track industry coverage. She opened it. The headline had gone from entertainment blogs to a mid-tier news outlet. The language had shifted from speculative to declarative, and the photograph used was not the blurry paparazzi image of her leaving the building. It was a photograph from her private account, taken at a company event 2 years ago. Her smiling, in a room full of colleagues. The caption beneath it read, Sources close to Kang Min-jae confirm long-term relationship with foreign employee. Questions raised about workplace ethics and preferential treatment. Her throat closed. Sources close to Kang Min-jae. She read that again. Not sources close to Nyla Brooks. Not anonymous tips from entertainment insiders. Sources close to Min-jae. Which meant the story had been constructed to look like it originated from inside his circle. To look like someone in his world was talking. To make her appear as a leak in his operation, a liability, a woman who had gotten close enough to be dangerous to him professionally and personally. Preston had not just gone after her reputation. He had constructed a story that could turn Min-jae's own people against her. She was standing on the curb outside her building with her bag when the car arrived, and she got in, and she sat in the back seat looking at the phone screen while Seoul moved past the windows. And she felt the specific cold clarity of someone who understands that the game being played is larger than she initially assessed, and that the person playing it is not simply jealous or obsessive, but calculating, deliberately, methodically calculating. Preston Hayes had not contacted her because he wanted her back. He had contacted her to see if she could be frightened into retreating, into pulling away from Min-jae publicly in a way that would read as confirmation of the narrative he was building. If she withdrew, the story looked true. If she stayed, he had more material. Either way, he won something. Either way, she lost. She put the phone in her bag. She looked out the window. The car turned onto the mountain road 40 minutes from the city, and the lights of Seoul fell away behind them. And ahead in the darkness, the outlines of the compound resolved into shapes, walls, and lights along a perimeter, and the particular solidity of a place that had been built to keep things out. She thought about the woman in the photograph on that news site, smiling at a company event 2 years ago, in a room full of colleagues, not knowing that someone had been watching, had been accessing, had been waiting and cataloging, and building something out of the material of her ordinary life that she had never consented to give him. She had thought leaving was enough. She had been wrong. The gate opened ahead. The car moved through. Behind them, it closed. The compound at night was quieter than she expected. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of containment, of a place where the perimeter held something out and something in. The main structure was low and wide against the hillside. Lit from beneath, in a way that made it look like it had grown from the mountain rather than been built on it. Staff moved in the periphery with the discreet efficiency of people who had been trained to be present without being intrusive. Minjae met her at the door. He didn't say anything immediately. He looked at her face and read whatever was on it. She wasn't trying to hide it anymore. She was too tired to hide it. And he said, "What happened?" She showed him the phone. He read the headline, read it again. His jaw set in the specific way of someone receiving information that confirms a theory they had hoped was wrong. "Sources close to me," he said. "That's how it's framed. Nobody close to me spoke to that outlet." His voice was quiet and absolute. "This was constructed. The framing was chosen deliberately to put the origin inside my circle." "I know." She put the phone in her bag. "He's not just trying to damage me, he's trying to make me look like a liability to you, so that either your people push back and you pull away from me to protect the operation, or you don't pull away, and the story becomes that you chose a woman over your business judgment." She looked at him in the entrance light. "Either way, he gets the separation. Either way, the narrative is that I caused damage." Minjae looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone recalibrating the full scope of an opponent's strategy. "He's done this before," he said. "Yes. To you. In Atlanta. Different scale, same architecture." She shifted the bag on her shoulder. The weight of it was the weight of her apartment compressed to essentials, and she felt that weight specifically. What it meant to be standing in someone else's space with a bag of necessities because her own space was no longer safe. He's very good at making the people around his target feel like the target is the problem. He did it with my coworkers in Atlanta. He did it with people I considered friends. By the time I left, half of them had a version of me in their heads that wasn't me. It was his version, distributed carefully over 2 years. Her voice stayed flat, but her hands were not entirely steady. "And I rebuilt. I came here, and I rebuilt. And now he's doing it again, except the audience is larger, and the stakes are—" She stopped. "Higher," Minjae said. "Yes." He stepped back from the door. "Come inside." She came inside. The interior of the compound was not what she had expected, which had been something fortress-like and coldly opulent. It was considered. Clean lines, natural materials, the kind of space that had been designed by someone who understood that power does not need to announce itself through excess. There were books on low shelves. There was art on the walls that she recognized as genuinely significant without being decorative. The lights were warm rather than architectural. A staff member appeared silently and offered to take her bag. She let it go. Minjae led her to a room that opened onto a covered terrace overlooking the hillside, and they sat, not at a table this time, but on low furniture near the glass, close enough that the mountain air came through the cracked panel, and the city was a distant amber smear below the tree line. He poured water. She drank it. "I need you to tell me what you want to do," he said. "Not what I think should be done. What you want." She looked at the city lights. "I want him to stop." She said it simply. "I want the access to my private life revoked. I want the narrative he's building dismantled before it becomes the permanent version of who I am in this city." She paused. "And I want to do it in a way that I can live with, that I can look back on, and know I didn't become something I don't recognize to survive it." "That's a complete answer," he said. "What does your team have?" "Enough to pursue legal action on the unauthorized account access. Enough to formally request takedowns on the material sourced from that access. The news outlet that published the latest piece is small enough to be responsive to pressure, not coercion," he added, reading her expression, "legal pressure. Cease and desist on the false sourcing claim. That stops the current material. It doesn't stop him from generating new material." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "For that, we need to make the source visible. Right now he's operating anonymously. The blog accounts, the tips to outlets, all untraceable on the surface. When we complete the digital trail, we will have documentation connecting him to the account breach. That documentation can be released." "Released how?" "To the same outlets currently running the story, with full evidence." He looked at her. The story becomes woman stalked by ex-boyfriend who orchestrated a media campaign to destroy her reputation after she moved on. That is the true story. And it is a considerably more powerful story than the one he's currently telling. She was quiet. "He'll have a response," she said. "He'll have a version of that ready. He's been planning this long enough to have a counter. Probably." Minjae didn't soften it. "But his counter requires him to be a sympathetic figure, and a man who accessed his ex-partner's private account from another country, monitored her for 6 weeks, and then ran a coordinated harassment campaign. The moment she appeared in a photograph is not a sympathetic figure, regardless of how he frames it. She thought about this, about the specific calculation of it. She had spent years trying not to calculate, trying to simply live and work and move forward without the exhausting chess of managing an obsessive person's next move. She had thought, in soul, that she had finally escaped the need to calculate. She had been wrong about that, and the wrongness of it sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't dislodge. "He called me," she said, "before I blocked the number. He said he wanted to talk before it got worse for me." She looked at Min-jae. "He thinks I'm afraid. He thinks I'm going to reach out to him to negotiate because that's what I did in Atlanta. I tried to manage him. I tried to talk him down. I thought if I explained myself clearly enough, he would understand and stop." She paused. "He won't stop." "No. He needs to be afraid of the consequences instead." "Yes. Can you do that without—" She looked at him directly. "Without doing things I can't know about?" He held her gaze. "I can pursue the legal and digital routes with full transparency to you. Every step. If there are other routes available to me—" A brief pause. "I won't take them without telling you they exist." "That's not the same as not taking them." "No," he said, "it's not. I won't lie to you about what I am, but I will give you the choice." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Legal first, documentation first. Make the source visible." She breathed in once. "If that's not enough, we talk again." "Agreed." They sat in the mountain quiet for a while after that, not talking, not performing the absence of talking, just existing in the same space with the city far below, and the weight of the evening distributed between them in the specific way that weight distributes when two people have decided to carry something together. She fell asleep on the low furniture without meaning to. When she woke, it was 3 in the morning and someone had put a blanket over her. Not Min-jae, probably a staff member, but she was aware with a drowsy, uncomfortable clarity that he had probably asked them to. She moved to the room she'd been shown earlier and slept properly for 4 hours. And in the morning, she felt the specific grim clear-headedness of someone who has accepted the shape of a battle and is done being surprised by it. 3 days passed. They were not quiet days. The media did what Min-jae had predicted, escalated, compounded, reached for any new material with the appetite of something that needed feeding. A mid-tier celebrity news program picked up the story and ran a segment that used the word scandal 4 times in 90 seconds. Her name appeared in 6 more outlets. The framing shifted and mutated as it moved through the information ecosystem, acquiring details she didn't recognize and implications she hadn't made, and a version of her motivations that bore no relationship to her actual motivations. She watched it from the compound. She worked. Min-jae's team had arranged remote access for her work responsibilities, and she managed the wardrobe coordination for the fragrance campaign's final shoot days from a desk in a room that overlooked the mountain. Hyun-suk messaged her approximately 40 times a day. Ji-young messaged her twice a day with the specific brevity of someone who understood that brevity was the right call and was exercising admirable restraint. She answered all of them. She kept doing her job. Min-jae worked in adjacent rooms. They ate in the evenings in the same way they had eaten at the private dining floor, talking about things that weren't the situation because the situation existed in the daytime, and dinner was the hour when they both needed to be something other than 2 people managing a crisis together. She learned that he had grown up in this city in circumstances considerably less comfortable than his current ones. He learned that she had been playing piano since age 7 and had not touched a keyboard in 3 years because her apartment didn't have room for one. And the following morning, there was a small electronic keyboard in the corner of the room she was using that she did not ask about, and he did not explain. She played it for 20 minutes that afternoon. It was the most normal she had felt since the photograph. On day 4, Min-jae's team completed the digital trail documentation. He brought her into the room where it was laid out, 2 of his people, a lawyer she hadn't met before, a laptop open to a document 47 pages long. And he stood at the back of the room while his people walked her through it. Every access point, every timestamp, an account registered to a shell address that traced back through 2 layers to a device registered in Preston's name in Atlanta. 6 weeks of documented access to her private social media. Screenshots of the material taken, cross-referenced with the material, later distributed. And then the connection to the blog accounts. Not clean, not perfect, but documentable. A pattern of activity that originated from the same device cluster. A chain of digital evidence that told a story. She sat at that table and read every page. The lawyer, a woman named Park Ji-sun, who had the quality of someone who had been doing this work for a long time and had stopped being surprised by human behavior, explained the legal options: cease and desist, a formal complaint to the platform companies, civil suit for privacy violation across international jurisdiction, criminal complaint for unauthorized computer access under both Korean and U.S. law. Timeline, Nyla said. Cease and desist can be issued within 24 hours, Park Ji-sun said. Formal complaints to platforms within 48. Litigation timelines vary. The media component. The documentation can be released to news outlets concurrent with legal filing. The moment it's publicly filed, it becomes public record. Any outlet currently running the story will have access to the counter-evidence simultaneously with the legal action. Nyla looked at the 47-page document on the table. She thought about Preston's voice on the phone preview. We need to talk. It's Preston. The specific tone of a person who believed the conversation was already over and was simply managing the announcement of its conclusion. The absolute certainty of a man who had calculated that she was still the woman who would try to manage him down, who would reach for negotiation and quiet resolution because making noise had always cost her more than it cost him. She looked up at Park Ji-sun. File everything, simultaneously, legal action and documentation release. I want it to move at the same time. Nyla. Min-jae's voice from the back of the room. She turned. Are you certain? He said, not discouraging, checking. The voice of someone who wants to make sure the decision is hers. Yes, she said. He nodded once. Park Ji-sun began making calls. It took 14 hours. Nyla stayed in the compound, worked her remote shift, ate dinner with Min-jae, and did not look at her phone until Park Ji-sun messaged her at 11:47 that night with 4 words. Everything filed. Watch morning. She watched morning. The story broke at 6:52. Not an entertainment blog this time, but a legitimate news source that had received the documentation and verified it independently before publishing. The headline did not use the word scandal. It used the word harassment. It used the word stalking. It used the phrase coordinated digital campaign. Preston's name was in the headline by 7:15. By 8, the outlets that had been running the original story were updating with correction notices. By 9, the framing had inverted completely. She was no longer the subject of the story. She was the subject of a crime. She was standing on the terrace with coffee in both hands when Min-jae came out and stood beside her and looked at the city below. It's moving, she said. Yes. It's not over. No. He looked at the horizon. He'll respond. He has resources. He'll look for a counter-angle. I know. She felt something that was not quite relief and not quite victory. More the particular solidity of someone who has stopped defending and started standing. But the story is true now. That matters. It matters, he agreed. She drank her coffee. Ji-young wants to come see me, she said. I told her I'm at a friend's outside the city. She can come. That's... Nyla turned to look at him. That's your compound. I know what it is. He looked back at her. It can also be a place where your friend visits you. Those two things can coexist. She looked at him for a moment. You're very strange, she said. Yes, he agreed without any particular concern about this assessment. She called Ji-young. Ja-young arrived that afternoon in the way Ji-young arrived at most things, loudly, with food, talking before she was fully through the door. She looked at Nyla with the exhaustive assessment of someone cataloging the evidence of the last 4 days. And then she looked around the compound's main room with the expression of someone recalibrating every frame of reference she had brought with her. And then she looked at Min-jae, who was passing through the room with a document folder, and who nodded at her once with the brief courtesy of someone who is leaving space rather than occupying it. Ji-young waited until he was gone. Then she turned to Nyla. I have questions. I know. Starting with, I know. Nyla, he has a mountain. It is a compound on a hillside. With a perimeter. Yes. Ji-young sat down on the low furniture with the specific weight of someone processing multiple layers of information simultaneously. Are you okay? The question was simple and direct, and it was the first time in 4 days someone had asked it in a way that expected a true answer rather than a functional one. Nyla sat down across from her. She thought about what true looked like. "I'm scared," she said. "Not of Preston. I'm done being scared of Preston. What he did is documented and public, and he doesn't have the shadow of anonymity anymore, which is the only real power he had." She paused. "I'm scared of this." She gestured vaguely at the compound, at herself, at the space between those two things. "I'm scared that I'm making decisions because I'm in a dangerous situation, and the dangerous situation makes one particular choice feel safe, and I won't be able to tell, until later, whether the choice was actually good or whether I was just running toward cover," Ji-young said. "Yes." Ji-young was quiet for a moment. "He put a keyboard in your room." Nyla blinked. "How do you know that?" "Because I walked past the room, and there is a keyboard in it, and I know you haven't touched a piano in 3 years, and I know why. And I know that he must have found out somehow and just put one there, without making it a thing." Ji-young looked at her carefully. "That's not a man who needs you to need him. That's a man who just noticed something." Nyla didn't say anything. "I'm not telling you what to feel," Ji-young said. "I'm just noting the keyboard." They ate the food Ja-young had brought. They talked about things that weren't the situation, about the fragrant shoots last day, about Sua, who had booked a campaign off the back of the work she'd done, about a film they'd both been meaning to see for months. The afternoon moved in the way afternoons move when you let yourself be in them instead of fighting them. Ji-young left at 5. At the door she stopped, turned back and said, "For what it's worth. You seem like yourself, not a smaller version, yourself." Nyla held that. "That's worth a lot," she said. That evening, Preston contacted Min-jae directly. Not through a blog. Not through an outlet. Directly, a formal communication through his legal representation sent to Min-jae's company legal address, which meant Preston had retained a lawyer fast enough that he'd been expecting the documentation release and had prepared a response. Park Ji-sun brought it to them together. The letter was careful and lawyerly, and it said, between its careful lines, several things simultaneously: that Preston disputed the characterization of his activities, that he had documentation of his own pertaining to the nature of Nyla's relationship with Min-jae that he was prepared to introduce publicly, and that he would consider withdrawing from further media engagement in exchange for a private settlement, and the language here was precise, acknowledgement from Ms. Brooks that certain characterizations were inaccurate. Nyla read the letter twice. "He wants a retraction," she said. "He wants a public statement from you saying he didn't do what he did," Park Ji-sun said, "in exchange for him stopping. And if I don't give it, he introduces his counter-documentation, which we don't yet know the contents of." Min-jae, standing at the window, said nothing. Nyla looked at the letter in her hands, at the careful legal language dressed around the naked core of what it was. One more version of the same demand Preston had been making since Atlanta. "Say what I need you to say. Make the version of reality I prefer. Do it quietly, do it quickly, and I will let you have your life back." She set the letter down on the table. "What documentation could he have?" she said to Min-jae directly. He turned from the window. "About us," she said. "About whatever he's claiming is the nature of what we are." She looked at him clearly. "Is there anything he could have found that reframes this in a way that hurts you?" Min-jae held her gaze. "Nothing true. But something usable. Photographs of you at this compound could be presented in any number of damaging frames." He said it without looking away. "He will use the optics of your being here against you and against me simultaneously. So the offer is, I publicly discredit myself and you, or he publicly distorts us both. That is the offer." She was quiet. The room waited. And then, from the doorway, a voice she didn't recognize said, "Ms. Brooks." She turned. A woman stood at the entrance to the room. Late 20s, Korean, well-dressed in a way that was professional rather than decorative, with the specific look of someone who has driven a significant distance with a decision already made. One of Min-jae's staff hovered behind her with the expression of someone who had tried to announce this arrival and had been overridden. "I apologize for arriving without contact," the woman said. Her English was careful and clear. "My name is Han Soyeon. I am—" She paused, and in the pause was the weight of something she had rehearsed saying and still found difficult. "I am Preston Hayes' fiancé." The silence in the room rearranged itself completely. Nyla felt Min-jae go still behind her. She felt her own stillness. She looked at the woman in the doorway, at Han Soyeon's face, which was not the face of someone who had come to attack or to threaten, but the face of someone who had come because the alternative was to say nothing, and she had decided she couldn't do that anymore.
"He doesn't know I'm here," Soyeon said. She looked at Nyla directly, with the quality of someone who has decided that directness is the only thing left that means anything. "And what I'm about to tell you, Iya, he will not forgive me for it." She pressed her hands together once, briefly, at her sides. "But you deserve to know." She looked at Nyla the way someone looks when they are about to hand over something heavy. "He never stopped," she said. "Not once. Not for a single day." Her voice was steady, and it cost her something to keep it that way, and Nyla could see that cost clearly. "I found the photographs 6 months ago, on a drive I was never supposed to find. 3 years of photographs, Ms. Brooks. Your career coverage, your social media, every public event you appeared at. There was a folder, organized by year." She stopped, started again. "I thought it was old things he hadn't deleted. I thought it was the past. But the folder had files from 3 weeks ago, from last month." She looked down briefly. "He has been watching you the entire time he has been with me." The room held its breath. "He told me the media story was coincidental, that he happened to see your photograph and recognized you, and it was nothing." Soyeon's voice thinned slightly. "And then last night I found the draft documents on his laptop. The counter-strategy materials, the documentation he is planning to release about you and Mr. Kang. And I understood that this was not coincidental and it was not nothing, and—" She stopped, looked at Nyla. "He's going to use photographs from that private folder," she said. "Things he took without your knowledge, things from before you left Atlanta." Her jaw set. "And I have all of it. The original folder, the drafts, the access logs he kept." She reached into her bag and set a USB drive on the table between them. "I made copies before I left." Nyla looked at the drive, at the woman who had driven here with it, at the specific courage of someone who had decided that the right thing cost too much not to do it. She looked at Min-jae. "I was looking at this drive too, and his expression was the expression she now recognized as the one he wore when something had his full attention, and he was containing everything he felt about it, with the focused discipline of a man who has learned that undisciplined feeling is a liability. But beneath the containment, barely visible, was something that looked like fury, clean and cold and completely already walking toward it. She stayed 3 more days, not because she had to, not because the security situation required it, or because Park Ji-soon needed her present, or because Min-jae asked her to stay. She stayed because she woke on the morning after the filings and looked at the mountain light coming through the window and felt, for the first time in a week, something that was not the adrenaline of crisis or the managed numbness of survival, and she wanted to sit with that feeling long enough to understand its shape before she carried it back into ordinary life. The 3 days were quiet in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. She worked her remote shift each morning. She ate breakfast alone on the terrace and ate dinner with Min-jae in the evenings, and spent the middle hours of the day in a kind of deliberate stillness that wasn't rest exactly, but was the thing the body does when it has been running a long time and finally receives permission to stop. She played the keyboard for 40 minutes on the second afternoon. Nothing practiced, nothing structured, just her hands finding notes the way hands find familiar things in the dark. She didn't know Min-jae was in the doorway until she finished, and the silence that followed was the slightly different silence of a room with a person in it. She didn't turn around. "How long?" she said. "A few minutes." "You could have said something. You were playing." She set her hands in her lap. "I was just finding things. It wasn't performance." "I know," he said. "That's why I didn't say anything." She turned around then. He was leaning against the doorframe with his jacket off and his arms crossed, and the particular expression of a man who has seen something he wasn't expecting and is still processing what it means. Not sentimental about it. Just present with it, the way he was present with most things that mattered to him. "I used to play every day," she said. "In Atlanta, before Preston, before all of it. It was the thing that was purely mine. Nobody could have an opinion about it. Nobody was watching. It was just the space where I was completely alone and completely okay with that." She looked at the keyboard. He didn't like it, the time it took, the fact that it wasn't for him. She paused. "After a while I played less, and then I stopped. And I told myself I just didn't have time anymore, which was the story that was easier than the true one." Min-jae said nothing. "The true one was that I had learned to preemptively remove the things he might criticize," she said, "before he could criticize them, so there was nothing to defend."
She looked at her hands. By the time I left, I had gotten very small, very efficiently small, like I had folded myself down to the minimum dimensions required to exist without generating friction. And soul, he said. Soul was the unfolding. She looked up. Slowly. 3 years of slowly. Getting back to the original size. She held his gaze. And then you, which was a different kind of challenge to the smallness. How? She thought about it honestly. Because being small is a protection. If you're quiet enough and invisible enough and take up the minimum necessary space, there's nothing to target, nothing to damage. You're safe because you're not quite real enough to hurt. She paused. And then someone starts actually seeing you, and you have to decide whether being seen is worth the exposure. Is it? He said. She looked at him for a long moment. Ask me again in a year, she said. Something in his expression was as close to warmth as she had seen from him, which was not effusive or demonstrative, but was real, which was worth more than either of those things. A year, he said. Minimum. I can work with minimum. She went home on the fourth morning. The drive back into Seoul took 40 minutes, and the city received her the way it always had, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, the way a large, indifferent thing receives a small returning piece of itself. Her building looked exactly the same. The elevator worked because it had been working for 3 weeks since the maintenance team had fixed it. Her apartment smelled like her apartment. The particular domestic smell of her own things existing in a specific configuration of space. And she stood inside the door for a moment after the lock clicked behind her and breathed it in. Home. Hers. Still intact. She unpacked the bag methodically. Hung the burgundy dress. Put the toiletry bag back under the sink. Made the bed with the precise, somewhat compulsive thoroughness of someone reclaiming a space. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the light fixture overhead. The bulb she had replaced the night before the corridor, the night before any of this. A detail that now seemed like something from a different version of her life. And she let herself sit with all of it. The shape of the week. The shape of what had changed. Her phone had 42 messages she hadn't read. She read them in order, which meant she started with the oldest and worked forward through the crisis in reverse, watching the tone of Ji Young's messages shift from concerned to alarmed to steadied to relieved. Watching Hyun-suk's messages maintain their consistent register of professional anxiety undisturbed by any event in the external world. Watching a message from a number she didn't recognize resolve itself when she looked at the contact name the message had automatically pulled into Sua, the junior model, who had somehow obtained her number and sent a single message 3 days ago that said, I heard things got bad. Hope you're okay. You told me I did good in the close-up. I just wanted to say that back. Nyla read that one twice. She typed back, I'm okay. Thank you. You did good. She made coffee. She sat at her kitchen counter with it and looked at the water stain on the ceiling that she still hadn't reported to the building manager, and she thought about the specific texture of ordinary life, how it persisted, how it waited, how it was always there on the other side of extraordinary things being exactly what it was, persistent and mundane and hers. The legal process would take months. Park Ji-sun had outlined the timeline with the precise honesty of someone who did not believe in managing expectations optimistically. There would be proceedings. There would be documentation submitted and contested. Preston had retained new legal representation within 48 hours of his first lawyer's withdrawal. Someone less principled, Park Ji-sun noted, and therefore potentially more aggressive in the short term, though less capable of a sustainable defense given the evidence. His name remained in media circulation in the way that names remain in circulation once attached to a documented story. Not loudly, but persistently, the kind of presence that search engines preserve long after the news cycle moves on. His credibility in the version of events he had constructed was gone. That didn't make him safe. It made him cornered, which was different and in some ways worse, and Park Ji-sun had been clear that cornered was a state to be monitored rather than dismissed. Nyla monitored it. Not obsessively. Not with the constant low-grade vigilance that had characterized the last 3 years of her life in Seoul. The looking over the shoulder instinct that she now understood had been correct all along, and that understanding was its own complicated thing to live with. She monitored it the way a person who has been through something monitors it afterward, with clear eyes and appropriate seriousness, and the hard-earned wisdom to know that resolution and safety were not the same as invulnerability. Soyeon had remained in Seoul for 2 weeks. That had been Nyla's suggestion, and Min Jae's arrangement, and Soyeon's decision, which was the correct distribution of agency. They met for coffee twice during that period. Not at the compound, at a small place in Mapo that Nyla liked because it was loud enough to feel anonymous and good enough to feel deliberate. They didn't talk much about Preston. They talked about Soyeon's work, which was in textile design, and about Nyla's work, and about Seoul in winter, and about the specific experience of understanding, from the inside, that the person you had been living alongside was not who you had believed them to be, and what you did with the architecture of a life that had been built partly on a false foundation. "I'm not destroyed," Soyeon said, at their second coffee, with a directness that Nyla recognized as a statement being made to herself as much as to her companion. "I want to say that out loud. People expect me to be destroyed, and I am damaged, yes, altered. I trusted something that was not trustworthy, and that has a cost." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "But I'm not destroyed." "No," Nyla said. "You're not." "How do you know? You barely know me." "Because you drove to that compound alone with evidence in your bag," Nyla said. "That is not the action of a destroyed person. That is the action of someone who decided that the version of herself who does nothing was unacceptable." She paused. "Destroyed people do nothing. They just endure." Soyeon looked at her. "I endured for a long time," Nyla said. "That's how I know the difference." Soyeon went back to her life. She sent a message from the airport that was 3 words: "Thank you, truly." And Nyla saved it without analyzing why. The fragrance campaign launched 6 weeks after the shoot. Nyla saw the final images for the first time in a company-wide email, and she stood in the wardrobe suite and looked at them on her phone screen and felt the specific satisfaction of seeing something she had contributed to fully realized. The colors right, the textures right, the way the light interacted with the fabric exactly as she had calibrated it to. Good work, recognizable as hers even where her name wasn't attached, which was how most of her work functioned and which she had made peace with long enough ago that the peace was genuine. Su-ah was in 3 of the images. She looked present, not performing presence, actually present, in the way that is rarer than it sounds and more visible than people expect. Nyla sent her a message with the images attached. "Look at what you did." The response came in 40 seconds. A string of characters that resolved into an image of Su-ah holding her phone and crying very slightly and grinning at the same time, which was, Nyla thought, one of the more purely good images she had received on her phone in recent memory. Minji called on a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after she had left the compound. Not a text. An actual call, which was unusual and which she answered on the second ring. "Are you free Friday?" he said. "What's Friday?" "Dinner." She was quiet for a moment. "The private dining floor." "No." A brief pause. "There's a restaurant in Hanam, small. The owner trained in Osaka. It's not a Kang Industries property, and the reservation is under a different name, and I would like to have dinner with you there." She understood what he was offering. Not the controlled environment of his world, not the compound, or the private floor, or the arranged car. A restaurant. A table that anyone could see. A version of this that existed in the regular world rather than the secured one. "People might see us," she said. "Yes. There might be photographs." "There might be." "You're not concerned." "I'm not concerned," he said, with the flat certainty of a man who has made a decision and is reporting it. "Are you?" She thought about it. She thought about the corridor and the garment bags, and the cold coffee, and the freight elevator fixed overnight, and the keyboard in the corner of a room, and a terrace at 3:45 in the morning with the city below them, and neither of them pretending to be somewhere else. She thought about what it meant to not be small, to not preemptively fold. "No," she said. "I'm not concerned." "Friday, 7. 7, she said. She did not think about what to wear. Then she thought about it for approximately 2 hours on Thursday night and chose the burgundy dress because it was hers and it fit, and she felt like herself in it, which was the only metric that had ever mattered. The restaurant was everything he'd described: small, specific, the kind of place that understood that excellence didn't require spectacle. They were shown to a corner table and nobody looked at them particularly, or if they did, they looked and moved on, because Seoul was a city that had learned to be discreet about its powerful people in public, the same way it was indiscreet about them in private. And at a small table in Hanam, two people eating dinner were simply two people eating dinner. They talked about this campaign launch, about Sua's booking trajectory, which Nyla had been quietly tracking with the specific satisfaction of someone watching a thing she had invested small amounts of care into producing returns. About a building Minjae was acquiring in Jeju that he thought was a mistake and was doing anyway, which she found both familiar and entertaining. "Why do it if you think it's a mistake?" she said. "Because sometimes the mistake is interesting enough to be worth it." She looked at him. "That is a very particular philosophy of risk. It's led to most of the things I don't regret." She held his gaze. "Am I on that list?" He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the compound in the morning light, the way he had looked at her in the corridor the first day, with the full specific weight of actually looking. "You're at the top of it," he said. She looked back at her food. "That's a significant statement from a man who doesn't make statements lightly," she said. "I'm aware." "And you're not walking it back?" "No." She was quiet for a moment. The restaurant moved around them. Other tables, other conversations, the ambient sound of a city living its evening. Ordinary, unremarkable, real. "There's something I need to say to you," she said. "That I've been—" She paused, chose the word. "Organizing. In my head." He waited. "When this started, the corridor, the dinners, all of it, I was not in a position to let anyone in cleanly. I had 3 years of careful distance built around me, and good reasons for all of it, and you appeared and started noticing things, and I didn't know what to do with being noticed." She looked at him directly. "I was not easy. I pushed back on everything. I needed to be in every room where decisions were being made. I told you you were arrogant and dangerous to your own face." "To my back, technically. Minjae, go ahead." "I'm saying I was a lot. I am a lot. I do not become less of a lot because the crisis is over. I have opinions about everything. I require honesty to a degree that most people find exhausting, and I will never tell you what you want to hear as a substitute for what I actually think." She held his gaze. "I am telling you this clearly and without softening it because you deserve the actual information before you put yourself at the top of any list." He looked at her. "Nyla," he said. "Yes, that is exactly what I want," he said. "Exactly. All of it. Completely." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're very strange," she said. "You've said that before." "It remains accurate." He almost smiled. The real one. The one that reached his mouth rather than stopping at the attempt. "I'm aware of that too." She reached across the table and picked up her water glass and drank from it. And when she set it down, she left her hand on the table rather than pulling it back. And he looked at her hand on the table, and then he put his hand next to hers, not quite touching, 2 inches of space, and she looked at that distance, and then she closed it. His hand was warm. She had not expected that. She did not know why she had not expected it. They stayed until the restaurant began to empty. They walked out into the Hanam evening together, the Seoul air, cold and clear, with the particular winter quality of a city that does not stop moving regardless of weather. On the sidewalk outside, his security person was present at the appropriate distance, and there was a car at the curb, and Minjae stood beside her in the ordinary light of an ordinary street and looked at her. "Do you need the car?" he said. "I'll take the subway." "Of course you will. I live 40 minutes away. The subway is efficient." "Yes." The corner of his mouth. "I know." She looked at him. At this man who had walked into her corridor 4 months ago and looked at her with the specific gravity of someone who was actually looking and had not stopped, and who was standing on a public sidewalk in Hanam with his hand recently warm against hers, looking at her like she was something worth standing in the cold for. "I'm going to keep my apartment," she said. "I know. And my job, exactly as it is. I would expect nothing else. And I'm not going to be managed by anyone, including you." "Nyla." His voice was quiet and certain. "I have never wanted to manage you. I want to stand next to you. Those are different things." She looked at him. The city moved around them, indifferent and continuous, doing what it always did. "Next Friday," she said. Something shifted in his face. "The restaurant. Or somewhere else. Somewhere you haven't arranged in advance." She paused. "Somewhere we find on the day. You want to improvise. I want to find out what you're like when nothing is arranged."
She held his gaze. I want to know if you can do that. He thought about it, actually thought about it, with the honest consideration of someone who is genuinely uncertain. I can try, he said. That's the most honest thing you could have said. I know.
She tightened her coat against the cold. Friday. Friday, he said. She walked to the subway. She did not look back. Not because she wasn't aware of him watching, but because looking back was the thing she had spent years not doing, and she was done using her rearview mirror as her primary way of navigating. The stairs took her down into the warm underground rush of the city, and the train came, and she stood in the car with her hand on the overhead bar while Seoul moved past the dark windows, and she felt the specific sensation of a person who has survived something and is standing on the other side of it in one piece, which is not the same as being unmarked. She was marked. She would always be marked. The 3 years of careful distance and the week of crisis and the specific cost of having been watched without consent had all left their evidence in her. But marked was different from broken, and she had never been broken, and she knew that now with a clarity she had not always had access to. Preston's legal proceedings continued. They would continue for months. She showed up to each required appointment with Park Ji-sun and gave her account clearly and without performance, and went home afterward and made coffee and did not give the proceedings more of her mental space than the minimum required, because the minimum required was more than enough, and everything beyond it was time stolen from her actual life. The documentation was thorough. The case was strong. She did not need to hold it every day for it to move. Jae-young came over on a Saturday 3 weeks later, and they ordered food and watched a film they'd been meaning to see for months. And Ji-young said at some point during the second half, "You seem different." Different how? Less held. Ji-young considered this. Like you've put something down. Nyla thought about it. I think I have. The keyboard helped. Nyla looked at her. How do you know about the keyboard? You told me about the keyboard. I didn't tell you about the keyboard. You absolutely told me about the keyboard. After the second coffee with Soyeon. You said he just put it there without making it a thing, and you described it as Ji-young consulted her memory. Infuriating. It was infuriating. And also, don't. I'm just noting that Jae-young, you have a keyboard now. Ji-young gestured toward the corner of the room where the small electronic keyboard sat, which Nyla had brought back from the compound when she left, which Nyla had told herself was a practical decision about not letting an instrument go unused. In your apartment. That wasn't there before. Nyla looked at the keyboard. Yes, she said. And you play it? Sometimes. Every day? She was quiet. Most days, she said. Ji-young looked at her with the expression of someone who has made their point and has the grace not to labor it. She turned back to the film. After a moment, Nyla turned back to it too. They watched the rest of it together in the comfortable silence of two people who know each other well enough that silence is not absence but presence. And outside the apartment, Seoul did what it always did, and inside it, Nyla sat with her feet tucked under her on her own couch, in her own apartment that was exactly the right size for who she actually was. And she felt, not happy exactly, not in the uncomplicated way that word sometimes implies, but something more textured and more durable than happy. She felt like herself, all of herself. The version that had learned to be small, and the version that had spent 3 years unfolding, and the version that had stood in a corridor with garment bags and said what she actually thought, and the version that had survived the week that followed, and the version sitting on this couch right now. All of them present, none of them erased. That was the thing Preston had never understood, had never been able to understand, because understanding it would have required him to see her as a complete person, rather than a thing to be held. The smallness he had created in her was not the elimination of who she was. It was always temporary. The original person was always still there, waiting, folding herself down out of necessity, and unfolding again when the pressure lifted. She had always been going to unfold. She had always been going to come back to herself. Soul in winter, the keyboard in the corner. 40 minutes from a man on a public sidewalk in Hannam who had said, "I want to stand next to you," and meant it, in the precise way that made it different from every other version of that sentence she had ever received. Sua booked and working and crying and grinning at a phone screen somewhere in this city. Soyeon in another city rebuilding the architecture of a life on a truer foundation.
Park Ji-sun moving a legal case forward with the efficient certainty of someone who has the evidence and knows how to use it.
And Nyla Brooks, wardrobe coordinator, third year in Seoul, 40 minutes by subway from everything she had built, which was still standing, which had withstood the thing it had been put up against, which was hers. She played the keyboard that night after Ji Young left. Nothing practiced, just her hands moving in the dark of her own apartment, finding the notes that had always been there waiting, and the sound filled up the space around her, not perfectly, not without the small errors of someone whose hands had been away from keys for too long, but real, and hers. And enough. More than enough. The water stain on her bedroom ceiling was still there. She reported it to the building manager the next morning. It was fixed by Thursday. She did not think about whether that was a coincidence. She went to dinner on Friday. They found the place together, walking through Bukchon in the early evening cold, turning down streets without a plan. And the restaurant they ended up in was small and slightly too warm, and had plastic menus and food that was extraordinary, and Min Jae sat across from her in a booth with his sleeves rolled up and his jacket on the seat beside him, and looked like a man who had never had anything arranged in his life, which was not true, and which both of them knew was not true, and which didn't matter. I was trying. She was here. Outside, Seoul burned in every direction, all that light going on further than the eye wanted to follow. The city that had been hers for 3 years, and would continue to be hers. The city that did not stop moving regardless of what happened within it. The city that had witnessed the corridor and the compound and the mountain terrace and the sidewalk and this booth, and would witness everything that came after without commentary or judgment, just the lights, just the city. Just two people sitting across from each other in a slightly too warm restaurant with plastic menus, taking the next ordinary step together into whatever came next. Which was, it turned out, exactly enough.